everything starts from the home. Uh, we are just I just have one sister. We are just two of us, and my parents. My father was an engineer. My mother a zoologist. So when there are no boys in the family, especially those days, because now I'm a senior citizen, um, girls are encouraged to do whatever they want. And I came from a family where even my grandfather encouraged widow remarriage, started a school for orphan girl child. So we grew up, I think, in that sort of an atmosphere, which gave us a lot of independence and strength within ourselves, a lot of freedom that we could really go out and follow our path. And our parents encouraged us to do that. So I think that is the first thing that any woman needs, any girl child needs, that sort of freedom, support, and independence. And I did get that from my family. So my sister, my elder sister, who's older than me by 3 years, she first went to architecture school. And I don't know whether I should say I followed her footsteps, but it was always something I wanted to do. I still remember as a very young child uh, being taken to the Nalanda University, the monasteries with my parents, because those days, we all used to travel around India. It wasn't Hong Kong and Dubai and all these places. So parents would take us to different parts of India. We were very much a family who loved to travel. And I remember standing, and I've got this wonderful photograph also with my family standing among the brick ruins of Nalanda and thinking to myself that I want to become an archaeologist. I just got, so excited about that. And for many years, I thought perhaps that's what I could be. Even today, I love the Middle East. I love to go to places like Egypt and Jordan, and I've even been to Syria and Iran and places like that, because I just love ancient history and ancient ruins, and of course our own country. But then as I moved on in time, as I grew up a little older, I think between my mother and me, we talked and decided that maybe archaeology was not such an easy thing to do. By then, my elder sister, decided she was going to be an architect. There was a 3-year difference between us. And I saw what she was doing, and I knew that that's what I really wanted to do. So it wasn't difficult for me to make up my mind. We also stayed in a very old part of Mumbai, and the road going to our school, past the Oval Maidan, past the beautiful buildings of the university, of the High Court, of the Art Deco buildings. Mumbai was a very beautiful city architecturally. There were lovely homes, and there were lovely ordinary buildings as well, which had so many uses and purposes. So it just seemed a natural way for me to further follow what I dreamed about doing. So I didn't have any sort of a business plan or anything in mind that these were the targets I was going to reach. So different from today, where you follow a line, you follow a thread, you make plans. Mine was much more of a organic growth. Circumstances, situations made me realize that I could not work for anyone else. I got married. My husband was a surgeon in the army. We were moving around. And I automatically started thinking of what I can do on my own. And I had lucky breaks with different people. Living in Mumbai, a most cosmopolitan city those days. I got my first project was a factory connected project. Those clients are still my clients today after 40 years. That's the sort of relationship that developed. So it's a series of loving what you do, having a passion for it, working very hard. It's not an easy profession. People think it's very glamorous and it's, putting pretty furniture in a beautiful house. And it's not that at all. It's a very, very tough profession. And especially I have stayed primarily with building. I build, I do campuses, I do schools, hospitals, all types of building. And it's hard work. So you have, if you don't have that commitment and passion to want to make that difference, then you take other ways out, you know. For me, I was very clear. It was lonely. There were very few women. I don't think there were hardly any women who actually led a studio, which I built up to the size I have those days. And I didn't play golf. I didn't drink at the bar. So I didn't really have many architect friends at all. I just worked and I loved it. You know, I always tell this story about there was a famous architect who used to write for an Italian journal called Space and Society. And he saw some of the works I had done, early works. This was in the 90s, where I had converted a garbage dump into a park, the Kalappa Woods. I had done restoration of some of the cathedral schools. I had worked in a slum. I had also built new buildings, part of a factory. So he wrote an article on me, on my work in this Italian journal. And at the end, he says, you know, one of the most important things about Brinda Somaya's work is she builds appropriately. And I thought to myself, what a boring word, you know, appropriately, you know, not like this, that, dramatic, this, that. She works appropriately. And I went through many, many years of keeping this word in my head. And recently, a few years ago, we won a competition for the restoration of the famous Louis Kahn buildings at the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad. And during that time, I was doing a lot of research on Louis Kahn's work. I went to Philadelphia to his archives. I used to read about him. And I read an essay which he wrote where he said, one of the most important things is to build appropriately. And, you know, that gave me, you know, it was so important to read that. So how do you build appropriately? That becomes the question. For me, I study the land. The land is the most important thing because you have to hear the land. You have to tread the land lightly. You can't destroy the land with your building. You have to enhance the land with your building. So how do you work on the land? Because that's the most important thing. Then you have to study the climate, of course, the sun, the wind. How does the sun move? Which part of India are you in? India is such a huge country. If you're building in the Himalayas, you don't build like you're building in Kerala. If you're building in Calcutta, you don't build like you're building in Jharkhand or in Kutch. And my studio, SNK, has built in every part of India. So there is no stamp that I leave. I hope, I leave an appropriate, beautiful, spiritual building that, that people love, that they believe it's their own, that it raises their spirit, and that it's gentle to the land on which it is built, and that it is sustainable. So for me, that's my legacy. It's not to be published. It's not to win awards. If they come, that's fine. But that's never the purpose. That's never the reason. So one of the important buildings, I would say, is the Nalanda School, which we built in Baroda. It's a large school. It holds kids right from, you know, the baby school, kindergarten, right up to class 12. So, you know, it's hundreds of square feet. And it was in an open piece of land. And I have designed that entire school without air conditioning. Now, the most the worst pollutants for carbon footprint is the air conditioning systems. And that is what is contributing hugely with the construction industry to the climate issues that we have. That entire complex is not air conditioned except the computer lab and the principal's room, because everybody expected the principal to have an air conditioner. Now, how did we do it? We designed the building right from the beginning. The architectural vocabulary of the building itself has to be designed to be sustainable and eco-friendly. You cannot design a glass box and then certify it through some sustainable agency and then say the building is sustainable, because that's not my belief at all. So I designed the building with lots of courtyards of different sizes. There were primary, secondary, and tertiary spaces. There were corridors outside the classroom. We grew trees all around the buildings, which give great shade to the external parts of the building. We had double walls, so we created cavity walls to hold the heat in and prevent it from heating up the buildings, and during winter, keeping the rooms warm, because Baroda also has a cold winter. All the parapets and many of the rooms had jali-like walls where we had perforations in the brick. And it won the LEAF Award, the European Architects Forum Award for sustainability. So, how do you bring in sustainability? It's not ticking the boxes, using a certain type of glass or a certain type of air conditioning system. Sustainability has to start from the grassroots itself. And it can be done even in big projects, because this was a big project. It was hundreds of thousands of square feet. It was not a tiny little classroom that we did. So this was a very, very important project for me, because it showed how one can design sustainably. Now, that doesn't always work. Sometimes when we do big campuses, we've recently finished a very large campus in Indore. It was on a 100-acre property. We had to design 1 million square feet for thousands of engineers. Now, they're all on their laptops. So we made sure that where they work, the actual rooms, those are air conditioned. But we designed the rest of the campus in such a way that their breakout spaces, their garden spaces, you can come out to the greenery and get the shade, get a change of your mental way of working, and natural energy with solar, with water. So every project one has to look at differently and see, how do you work? How do you make it a net zero? How do you contribute and make sure that it's sustainable? So I have a big problem with the glass boxes that you see around you. I tell my daughter Nandini, who works with me, and so many times things come up and I tell her, I said, this is what we did 30 years ago. This is what we said 25 years ago. For instance, today they're talking about pavements. From 1980, I've been talking about pavements. I said, like Jane Jacobs said, if you can't walk in your city, it's not a city. I mean, she implied that. And I made sure that any building I worked on in the 80s and 90s, whether it was the Hong Kong Bank, whether it was the St. Thomas Cathedral, whether it was any big headquarters, I demanded that those people do the pavements outside their building in the fort area or any area. People have to walk the streets. So all these points, you're so right. Now these are all buzzwords. But it's not enough to be buzzwords. It's got to be part of the way you think. It's got to be within you. And if you see my work and the work of my studio, SNK, you will find that all these things which people are talking about always existed in the concept and the design process. So it's not a manipulated thing. It's basic to our thinking, to our integrity, to our ethics, to our value system of our studio. I think for me, the client is a very important part of the process and the design of architecture. And I always hope that I get like-minded clients who think along the way I do. They may not come to us knowing certain things which we do as architectural professionals, but when we talk and discuss the project, it has to be that we are on the same side of the team. And if we're not, then it's better we part ways, isn't it? So I always believe that people come to me knowing the type of studio we run, knowing the type of work we do. Some people will come to us because of who we are, and some people will choose not to come to us because of who we are, because they want to build differently. And that is fine with me. But we have today almost 70% of our work is from repetitive clients, which is a huge, huge amount of repetitive client work. And I think that's one of the most important things for me, the respect and the relationship we have with them. They trust us, they believe in us, they come to us because they believe in our philosophy, the way we work, and yet we deliver contemporary work, cutting edge work. They're very high in technology. For instance, we just did the international headquarters of Bombay House and Bharat Petroleum, and now we're working on the Reserve Bank. Now, the chairman of Bombay House, when they upgraded Bombay House, they could have gone to anybody in the world, isn't it? And they chose to come to us. And we upgraded the entire building and refurbished it, brought in the artwork, the stories, everything. Now, why did they come to us? So, I think we have to be honest to ourselves. We have to be genuine. We have to be who we are, not pretend we're someone else just to get a project. And work will come in from the right people whom we believe in. So that's been my philosophy. I love technology, and technology is so important today. So maybe if I may not be answering your question completely, but if I was younger, I would be even more into it than I am. I love to learn about it and do my best, but I am behind the rest of the studio. We have a studio which is mixed with young and older people. So advice to myself, I don't want to sound smug, but I think I've done my best in whatever I believed in. I've never compromised in my beliefs. I believe that my studio is an ethical studio where integrity and value systems are very, very important and hold good. And if I have passed that on to others, then I'm very satisfied. I don't know what would I have done different. I'm one who's quite contented. Let me put it that way. Failures or difficulties, I would rather put it that way. It's a difficult profession, so there are always difficulties that happen. See, we're not just designing something and then disappearing. We have to make sure that we complete the construction within time, within limit, within budget. All the difficulties like the pandemic which came up, so many issues come up during the course of construction. One disappointment I may have had was we won the Indian Institute of Management for the restoration of the Louis Kahn buildings, which were the three main buildings and the dormitories. And over the last 2 years, the client is rethinking about certain parts of that competition and what they really want to do and what they want to restore. For me, 20th century architecture is extremely important. And not to say that historic and colonial and vernacular architecture isn't, but a lot of 20th century very valuable architecture is being destroyed. So although they haven't taken a decision, it was a difficult time to go through due to the change in thinking of the institute itself. What is the role I can play? What is the role other architects around the world can play? So there are no easy answers, for your beliefs in what you do. And how strong do you stay with those beliefs? For me, I believe quite strongly in certain things. And we will have to see how certain things go. Also, I think architects, this happens to all architects, is that if we have to compare the works that we actually build with the works that are called unbuilt projects, it's huge. So there are huge number of projects where we have worked on which never got built. And some of them are very dear to my heart. One being the Indus Valley Museum. I always want India to have a museum for the Indus Valley civilization, or the Harappan civilization as it's now called. Because around the world, whether you're in Egypt or in Iran or in the United States or England or name it, they have museums of their history and of their origins. We don't have that. So at one time, we were appointed to build an Indus Valley Museum by the Global Heritage Fund. and it was moving, and then that fell apart. That was one of my biggest disappointments. What does a building do? That takes you back to that question. It performs a function. You come into the building, it performs a certain function, you belong to that, a sense of belonging, a sense of place, a sense of time, all that it does. So what is the extra that a building should do? How does a building raise your spirit when you walk through the spaces, or when you sit in it, or when you look around? That is the trial, or that is the test of really good architecture. Now, that spirituality will differ from person to person, and will differ even from architect to architect. So no architect should be so presumptuous to think that all their buildings are spiritual. For me, if a person begins to feel a connection and an ownership with the building where they live, or where they work, or where they enter, that connection is what is most important. For instance, I built, there are two instances. I built a very small church in Navi Mumbai, and talking about the ownership that goes to the people whom the building belongs to from the hands of the architect. And it was designed for X number of people. It was a very small plot in Navi Mumbai. So we built a lovely little church with a ground floor and a mezzanine. There was a small budget. It even won an award for being, a very sculptural church, because we couldn't have any sort of embellishment on it. And then I brought out a book on my work called Works in Continuities. And I decided that I was going to photograph my buildings as they are today. I was not trying to show sterilized buildings as when we just built them. I wanted to understand how people use them. And when I went to this church, sent with photography, the church services had become so successful that from just English and Marathi and maybe Hindi, it had gone to Tamil and Telugu and many languages. So what they had done, the church goers, they had added a blue plastic cover on the top floor on the terrace, and they had completely covered part of my facade. I mean, I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, what have they done? At least they could have done this to not spoil the architectural facade. And then I thought, but look, they love their church. It's so comfortable. It's so wonderful for them. They've expanded. It's successful. And they needed extra space, and they worked out a way to do it. So I took a picture, and everyone was horrified that I was actually going to put that picture in my book. And I did. I put that picture in my book because that told a story. That's what the building did to them. And that's the building they will love, and that's the building they will fight for. That's what's important. You have to fight for what you love. And if you don't love it, then that's what's demolished. That's what goes. Similarly, when I did the village, which I did in Badli, the houses that I built, we built basic houses, but we designed it in such a way that the inhabitants of each one of these houses could add to it. And when I went back after 6 years, I couldn't recognize the original houses which I had done, because they built otlas, they built somebody's built a first floor, someone built a little shed in front for their animals, but each one has taken a house and made it their home. That's what architecture is about.